Middle East is the easiest problem for Trump because all he has to do is continue to provide weapons, and it's up to Israel to come up with a winning policy. It's not all he has to do is continue to provide weapons and provide diplomatic support for Israel. What he can't do, and this is why again picking Waltz as his national security advisor, is try to play into Israel's hands by being very aggressive against Iran. If as long as the United States is hands off Iran and just telling Israel, look, we'll give you what you need, but you've got to solve this Hamas and Hezbollah thing on your own, which they won't. I think Israel goes on the back burner. If you bring Iran into the mix, it comes up, one of the front burner issues, and it's very problematic because a conflict between Israel and Iran will inevitably lead to a conflict between Iran and the United States, and that will inevitably lead to global energy crisis, potential of nuclear weapons use, and an absolute disaster. Taiwan is the furthest away. Trump is going to seek to resolve the Taiwan issues economically, and he doesn't have the tool set to do it right now, so he's going to have to feel that one out. There will have to be some song and dance with the Chinese, initiating some sort of diplomatic engagement before he implements harsh policies. So I'm not too worried about China. Russia is very problematic. We've heard a lot of talk about, policy options coming out of the White House, the new president-elect White House. It's not a White House yet, but a hotel room, where they are, they're talking about, just ridiculous things about getting Russia to freeze the front line, allowing European troops to patrol a demilitarized zone. No, and no. I mean, it's just Russia didn't do what it has done for the past 2.5 years, simply to, surrender everything away because Donald Trump got elected president. I think there is a solution to be had there, but it's a solution that has to recognize the strategic nature of Russia's victory, the absolute reality of Ukrainian defeat, and together with Ukraine, a NATO and American defeat. I mean, you have to accept the loss. Donald Trump is in a position to do that by saying that we should never have been there. Had I been president, this never would have happened. And I'm not going to, put the lives of American soldiers at risk to try and fix a problem they started. That, we're going to accept reality and move him. But they're not inclined to do that. The people that he is surrounding himself with are all talking about, trying to put pressure on Russia, up to and including allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russia. This is going to lead to an escalation that could lead to direct conflict between Russia and the West, and that leads to nuclear war. That's the biggest threat right now, the Ukraine issue. If the Trump administration fails to live up to the promise or the potential that was articulated in the article back in September that was published on in the Hill online magazine by Donald Trump Jr. and RFK Jr., that talked about a need to bring an end to the conflict, a need to avoid nuclear war. If they don't follow through on that potential and they try to think that they can somehow coerce Russia into accepting a negotiated settlement that makes it look like Russia lost, then we will inevitably move towards direct conflict and nuclear war. It's the most dangerous scenario out there. First of all, the idea, I think Jake Sullivan's talking about, is it $7 or $70 billion? I think it's $7 billion worth of equipment. Stack it up. Here's my challenge to Jake Sullivan. Take all your money, put it on the ground, and tell me how many triggers it pulls. None. Ukraine doesn't have a money problem. Ukraine has a manpower problem. Ukraine doesn't have sufficient trained manpower to, maintain cohesive military operations on the length of the line of contact. No amount of money is going to change that reality. They've already burned through $120 billion of U.S. taxpayer money. I mean, making it 127 billion doesn't change anything. And again, Donald Trump comes in. It's not as though there's a ready solution out there, that Trump can come in with a winning hand. If there was a winning hand to be played in Ukraine, the Biden administration would have played it already. But there isn't a winning hand. Politically, the Biden administration has decided that they can't admit defeat. Trump will have to admit defeat, but say it's their fault. It's Biden's fault, not my fault. But the only way this war ends is with a Russian victory. I'll just say that one more time so it sinks in. The only way this war ends is with a Russian victory. And the terms of that Russian victory will be set by Russia and Russia alone. And the Trump administration has to expect that, because we're too late into the game. We don't have any leverage here. There are things that could have been done before Russia initiated the special military operation that might have, walked Russia away from confrontation, but it would have required in every single case that the West admit that their prior policies were wrong, that Russia was right, and that the West is going to accede to Russian demands on certain levels. And nobody was willing to do that. And until which time we in the West are willing to accept a Russian victory and accept the fact that Russia and Russia alone gets to dictate the terms of conflict resolution, this war will go on. This is a war of existential consequence for Russia, not because Russia made it that way. We did in the West. We're the ones that say that this is we are involved in a conflict that seeks as an outcome the strategic defeat of Russia. The strategic defeat of Russia. Russia's not going to accept any negotiated settlement that furthers this strategic objective. Russia doesn't want to be strategically defeated, and one of the best ways to ensure that Russia won't be strategically defeated is for Russia to win this proxy war in Ukraine over Trump. None whatsoever. They have no leverage over the United States. I mean, that's one of the realities, again, people ignore. He's the British defense minister. If he mobilized the totality of the British military and put them in a large European-sized soccer stadium, there'd be 20, 30,000 unsold seats. Great Britain's a joke. I mean, yes, they have nuclear weapons on submarines, but other than that, they're a joke. Their military shrinking at a time when he's talking big. Who's he going to partner with? France? France a joke. Collapsed nation, too many internal problems. Germany? Germany's a joke. I mean, in order to be able to put pressure, you have to have capabilities. Because, one of the things is, if you don't do this, we will do this. But what is Europe threatening to do? It can't do anything. And so Donald Trump is not going to be pressured by them. Worse, he's just going to turn to the British and say, what part of we're pulling out of NATO, if you do this, you don't understand? What part of we don't want to do this anymore? NATO ceases to exist if the United States withdraws. Ceases to exist. Can't afford to stay on. All these militaries that have lived off of the largesse of the American taxpayer for the past 30 plus years will collapse, because too many assumptions have been built into how they do business, how they prioritize their budgets. And those assumptions are all premised on the United States will be here to back us up, that we don't need to have, the solid military that one would normally expect of a European power, because the United States will fill all the gaps. But when the United States says, no, we're not doing that anymore, now you got to fill the gaps, and they can't afford it. Can't afford it. So this is really desperation on the part of failing nations trying to breathe life into the failing European Union, into a failing NATO alliance. I think the writing's on the wall for NATO and the United States. The best they can hope for is to try and put the brakes on any precipitous disengagement by the United States for at least 4 years, in hopes that MAGA is defeated at the polls in 2028. But Trump is working on an accelerated timeline, and Ukraine might be an issue that forces Trump to pull the plug, not just on Ukraine, but on NATO and in Russia right now, where there's just no common ground. For us to even talk to the Russians, the first things we have to do is change the policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. Straight, Russia's not going to talk to an America that has a policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. There's nothing in it for Russia. So Russia won't come to the table, especially to talk about disarmament. I mean, so what are you asking us to do? The Russians say, get rid of our nuclear weapons, the ones that prevent you from intervening in Ukraine. Get rid of our nuclear weapons as part of a strategic dialogue, disarmament dialogue, while you maintain a policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. The one thing that prevents you from ever defeating us strategically is nuclear weapons. Why would we negotiate these away? And they're right. But a lot more has to happen too. There needs to be substance. I can't speak for the Russian government, but I would imagine that one thing that makes sense is to say that if you want to talk disarmament, it's not just about walking away from seeking the strategic defeat. You have to end all sanctions. You can't sanction our banks. You can't sanction our companies. You can't sanction our people, especially anything that's related to Ukraine. Has to end. And you have to be willing to respect Russian national security priorities, that Russia has a sphere of interest, and that Russia has every right and duty and responsibility to protect its rights and its interests within this sphere. If you can do that, then we might sit down at the table and begin talks with you. But otherwise, what is the purpose of the talks? To further NATO, to create the conditions for Ukraine to join NATO, to weaken Russia so that you can achieve the strategic defeat of Russia. These are non-starters. Russia's not going to engage in that kind of dialogue. So right now, unfortunately, I think disarmament is dead. What I would advise the Trump administration to do is to rebuild or breathe new life into the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which Bill Clinton, it was created in 1961 by John F. Kennedy, and Bill Clinton killed it in 1999. But in the interim, it oversaw some of the most, the high water mark of arms control and disarmament, the INF Treaty, START Treaty, the SALT agreements. This was all done because anti-ballistic missile treaty because of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. We don't have people who are capable of carrying out meaningful disarmament talks. So before we start to engage with the Russians on the basis of an empty suit, while we're trying to convince them that we're serious about changing the direction of our policy, we need to create a disarmament agency who is responsible for nuclear disarmament, for arms control, and start to rebuild the muscle, the diplomatic muscle that used to back up arms control. We need to shift responsibility for policy making away from the Department of Defense back to the State Department. But again, we get back to, in order to do that, you need somebody who's not named Marco Rubio in charge of the State Department. Survives and should be allowed to survive. Ukraine's lost this war. I don't know what part of that people don't understand. And the loss means that Ukraine's going to have to go through some fundamental changes. I don't think Russia allows Ukraine to elect a new Zelensky. I don't think there will be presidential elections in Ukraine that Russia would respect the outcome of, so long as the Ukrainian constitution empowers Banderist ideology. There's going to have to be some fundamental changes before we talk about restoring democratic legitimacy to whatever a post-conflict Ukraine looks like. And even then, we don't know what it looks like. But the idea of linking the need for Ukraine to have presidential elections to any outcome related to this war is absurd in the extreme. The Ukrainian government is a illegitimate government in the eyes of the Russians. An election isn't going to fix that. They need a new constitution, one that says Banderist ideology, because denazification continues to be one of the two principal objectives of Russia in this conflict that they said they've never walked away from. Denazification means purging Ukraine of this Banderist ideology, this ultranationalism that's manifested itself in various political parties, Sloboda, right sector, etc. That's just the way it is. Nima, in May 2nd, 1945, General Krebs walked into Chuikov's office thinking he could negotiate. He sat down and pulled out a piece of paper and said, here's the terms of the negotiation for the surrender, we believe. And Chuikov went, there ain't no negotiation. Lay down all your arms. When they occupied it in April of 2014 and continued to occupy it up until the point of liberation. Ukraine is not the victim here. They started this war. They are influenced by one of the most despicable ideologies in modern history, the ideology of Stepan Bandera. There will be no negotiation because Ukraine has lost this war and lost the right to exist as currently manifested. So I don't understand why people keep saying that, well, there needs to be a negotiation. No, there doesn't. The negotiation will be Ukraine's surrender, and we will now dictate the outcome. That's the way it's going to end. And those who don't accept that are setting yourselves up for failure, because I don't believe Russia at this point in time is in a mood to give Ukraine. Putin put the best deal on the table available for Ukraine back in June at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. And he told the Ukrainians, take this deal. It's the best you're going to get. It was a modification based upon current realities. So current realities are that Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk are permanently part of Russia, but everything else will be part of a Ukraine, a post-conflict Ukraine. These are the terms. Best deal they had. That would have been the basis of a negotiation. But he's told the Ukrainians, don't turn your back on this, because there won't be, and this is the part I'm trying to impress on you, there won't be a second chance. So why do we keep talking about negotiations as if Ukraine has a vote? The only vote Ukraine has is what color pen to use to sign the document of unconditional surrender. This conflict ends with a USS Missouri type moment. That's when the USS Missouri went into Tokyo Bay and brought in the defeated Japanese who signed the documents of unconditional surrender. That's how this war ends. It's about their new strategic partnership. The answer is no. Their strategic partnership doesn't depend upon what the United States thinks. Their strategic partnership exists because of what the United States has done and is committed to continue doing, both in Europe and in Asia. It's a reaction to American hegemony. So the idea now that the new American hegemon, Donald Trump, is coming to the table saying, I'm concerned, I don't think the Russians and Chinese really care about your concern. They don't want to hear about your concern. They want to hear about what you're going to do to reduce the potential of conflict in Europe and reduce the potential of conflict in Asia. You know, maybe then the Russians and Chinese can ratchet down the joint weapons development thing. But I mean, you know, the United States has been developing weapons jointly with everybody in the world except the Russians and the Chinese, and nobody blinks an eye over that. This is stupidity in the extreme. Again, what is the United States going to do? Double down on Europe? Double down on Asia? That's why the Chinese and the Russians are entering this new relationship, because that's what they fully expect from the United States. So Trump doesn't bring any cards to the table. He doesn't sit there and say, you know, well, I'm holding a winning hand now. He's picking up the same hand that was dealt Joe Biden, which is a losing hand. Huffing and puffing and, you know, puffing out your chest and saying things doesn't change the reality that Russia and China in February of 2022 committed on a strategic course that was designed to bring down the rules-based international order. They're not reversing on this. They're not backing down on this. It's not up to them to alter what they're doing. They're not going to. They did this because they had no other choice. And Donald Trump isn't running around saying, oh, no, we're changing the way we do everything. He's basically coming in saying, we're just going to be stronger and more assertive than the Biden administration. Russia and China aren't going to respond to that. Not at all. So unless Trump comes in with a new approach, and again, you're not going to do that with a Marco Rubio as your Secretary of State. It's very hard to imagine doing that with Waltz as your national security advisor. Who's going to be the wonderful face of America in the international communities? We try and convince the world that we've changed course. Elise Stefanik. I think Trump is setting himself up for failure here across the board. Ask Volkswagen why they're shutting down 3 of their factories. It's because Europe decided to enter into a de-risking policy. Germany de-risked itself in China. That meant shutting down opportunity. The Chinese have adjusted. Europe's not consequential. Europe's inconsequential. Europe's in decline. What is Europe going to do? They've already committed suicide by joining American-led sanctions of Russia. That's the end of Europe. So do they want to hasten their decline by joining in a trade war with China? And the United States isn't going to bail them out. The United States is laughing all the way to the bank and to the auction yard where they get to buy off, dirt cheap prices, the European assets, as Europe basically carries out a sale, liquidation sale. Europe's not a major player right now. They're a joke. They're literally a joke. How can you speak of having a unified Germany? Germany is a unified Europe when Germany, the economic heart of it, is in free fall right now. Free fall. France is stumbling along. Great Britain, it's just a joke. Italy, incapable. What is Europe? Define Europe. Define to me what Europe is, what it stands for, what it represents, how it manifests itself power economically, politically. You can't. Europe is in decline, a rapid decline. I think China and Russia have already adjusted to that reality. They're not. Europe should focus on fixing its own problems before it talks about intervening in complex foreign problems all the way around the world in the Pacific. I mean, it's not like Europe has a border with the Pacific. So no, I maybe I'm too dismissive of Europe, but they don't impress me at all right now. They stand for nothing. They have nothing. They don't bring anything to the table, literally. Take a look when European officials travel around the world. Nobody takes them seriously anymore. Because first of all, what is Europe? Define Europe. And, the answer is Europe is an extension of American policy. And when the Europeans decide to deviate from that, then we cut off the lifeline and Europe withers. And that's what's happening right now. Europe, the only way Europe has any relevance is that they stand side by side with America. But see where that's gotten them on Russia. So now they're trying to declare their independence, but they can't. These are the equivalent of children who spent their entire developmental years in mommy's basement playing video games and eating fast food ordered by mommy. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to work. They don't know how to do anything. And now they're 40 years old and mommy's kicking them out of the basement. And they're out in the streets going, oh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? How do I get an apartment? How do I get a job? How do I do anything? Mommy, help me. In America, the mommy is saying, no, we're done. We're done. That's Europe. Trump's not stupid. We can mock him all we want to. He recognizes that de-dollarization is one of the great threats to the United States. I'm telling you right now, if Donald Trump came in on day one and said, I am ending all sanctions against Russia and China, ending them, lifting them. SWIFT, open for business. Russian banks, come on in, use it. What just happened? Just doing that alone, what happened? Oh, and the third component. And I'm releasing the sovereign wealth funds back to Russia. We're not seizing them anymore. And we're going to repay them all the interest that we stole. BRICS just had a meeting. where they were talking about how they're going to be moving forward to a BRICS currency, alternative banking systems, et cetera. But they themselves are acknowledging it's very difficult to do. It's very inefficient to do, very expensive to do, but they have no choice because the United States has denied them access to the dollar. What he just did is made it impossible for BRICS to go forward on that. He doesn't have to say, I'm opposed to it. He can say, if I were Donald Trump, I'd give a speech. I support BRICS in moving forward in any direction they want to. And if BRICS chooses to move forward with an alternative currency, that's a decision they made. But until they do that, I'm making the dollar available to everybody. The dollar is back to being global friendly. You can rely on the dollar. And SWIFT, I know that you guys are trying to get something there, but it's not quite there yet. So in the meantime, while they're trying to do that, come on over to SWIFT and make it happen. That's the end of BRICS's de-dollarization. Isn't going to happen. As long as you sustain this, make the dollar friendly. That is a huge victory for the United States. As Vladimir Putin has pointed out, over the course of time, making the dollar the world's reserve currency, it's about $12 trillion of economic benefit the United States has accrued from that we're going to lose if we allow it to do. So the first thing you have to do is undermine that, but you don't do it by attacking that. You just simply do it by making the dollar attractive. Can Trump do that? The answer is he could, but he has to get the right people to do that. See, what I just did is win the war without appearing to be too strong. I just won the war. I made the dollar relevant again. All the things Donald Trump wants to do, and it happens overnight, but it didn't require bullying. It didn't require posturing. It didn't require anything except to common sense policy. But Trump is in the, peace through strength, all this kind of crap. So it's all about posturing. It has to be seen that I'm doing that. You can't get to where I just got you by confronting people. Literally, you have to win back the trust and confidence of the world in the dollar, and you do that by making the dollar accessible to everybody, making it convenient to everybody. You solve almost all your global financial problems right off the bat. The next thing you do is with the Chinese. This is what I would tell Trump. Do not get engaged in an infrastructure war with China. They have a $10 trillion head start. We can't compete. What you do is lift all tariffs with China, free trade, and then jump in on that $10 trillion money-making machine with everything you got. Flow in there. Get into Africa through the Chinese roads. Take advantage of this. Get in and lock yourself into those economies, not as a competitor with China, but as a partner of China. And again, you do that combined with the dollar policy. As you go in there, the dollar is going to be the denomination of global commerce. You've just won the global economic war without firing a shot, without spending a dime, because you're going to become such an important part of what China's looking for, which is to get that trade volume up and all this kind of. Yes, China's going to do well, very well. But the growth that they will experience is because of us, which means they can't ignore us anymore. They have to work with us. And now we have common cause to talk to the Chinese. Now, if you want to break China and Russia apart, you don't do it by threatening them. Again, I would say I'm so in favor of Russia and China working together. I think this is awesome. I support BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I support it all. I want good, tight relations with Russia and China. But now you've made yourself very important economically to China. Doesn't mean you have to say anything. It just means that China will adjust accordingly. The same thing with Russia. By having good relations with Russia, you make yourself relevant with Russia again. My dogs apparently disagree with my policy formulations. But this is how you win. You don't win by confronting people. You win by winning them over. And we still are a nation with enough reach and depth and everything that if we just did this a little bit differently, we could win, hands down, make ourselves relevant again.